Okay. And I'm going to start off with sort of a general introduction, present some generalities about cross-country flying. And then Scott will get to more specifics aimed primarily at the silver badge. But the truth is that the longer flights are just stringing together a bunch of silver badges end to end, mostly. So, well, not exactly, but sort of. So this applies to everyone. And for those guys who've been the full distance, and anytime you want to throw your 2 cents worth in, feel free to add, contribute your experience. So I know who you are. So anyhow, I'm going to start sharing my screen. And okay, so this is our, I've used this title slide for several years now, but revised it. We got a little bit of new material in here, so don't be put off by having seen it before. Plus the fact that, what worked 10 years ago still works today. So why do cross country? Why not? You can read as well as I can. But in my opinion, the whole point is after you've found that you can stay up within 5 miles of the local airport, you can climb and fly around and drink beer later and say, what a great day I had. It's sort of the mystery is gone, and you need new challenges. We all need new challenges. So basically, new challenges to ourselves is what the cross country part is about. So that's why I want to do it. That's why most of the rest of us do it. We just get bored hanging out in the same little place. So, combination of experience and practice. And how do you get experience? By practicing. What's the old saying? Good judgment is formed by learning from your bad judgments. Well, we'll try to eliminate some of the bad judgments by giving other experience. And the flight instructor's manual says learning takes place when there's a change in behavior as a result of experience. But it doesn't have to be your own experience. It can be other people's experience. So, preparation. This is basic. If you do not prepare, then things are going to happen and it's going to mess up your whole day. And it'll make you wonder why you even bothered trying to do any of this stuff. Experience. These are the important things. This one, thermaling on autopilot. You need to be able to control the glider, make it do what you want while concentrating most of your effort outside the plane. 90% of what you need to know and 90% of what you should be observing is outside the glider. So these are practice. The 2 essentials: accurate off-field landing ability, because there's going to be some times when that thermal that you need just isn't there. So to WWSS. The original cross-country instructor manual gave us 7 S's. Well, the mnemonic is supposed to make memory easier, but if you just 7 S's doesn't give you a lot of clues. W, wind, wires, surface, and slope. Okay. Wild women seek sex, according to Ed. All right, just keep it short, keep it easy to remember.
What are the other 2 7? Who are the other 2 S's? I know
surface, slope, size, shape, you know, I don't
Stock,
know.
full wires, and then there's two others.
Yeah. So I don't use that. Under stress, you're not going to remember all those things.
Yeah, I like wind wire, surface slope.
You know, you're not, other things are just going to fall into place. But definitely all fields have wires on all sides and occasionally in the middle. Land in the dirt, you won't get hurt. You will come to a sudden stop when you land in the dirt. You're not going to roll far, so the size of the field isn't quite as critical. Thermaling, I'll never be satisfied with the climb you've got. There's always better climb available. Audio vario, look outside. Practice a very steep bank. I heard George Moffat in a talk once saying, practice a 60-degree bank and then you won't have any trouble with a 45-degree bank. Okay. If the steepest you ever try to fly is a 45-degree bank, you're going to have a hard time controlling it. So practice very steep banks. Check the altimeter. Now, what does that mean? One of our former club members by the name of Jerry Miller gave us an expression called screwing yourself into the ground. What that means is this. If you are half of your circle is in lift and half in sink, the next half is sink. Okay. So if the altimeter is not increasing, it's going to be decreasing. And you could be going around thinking you're getting nibbles of lift. Hey, yeah, I'm climbing. Oops, no, I'm not. I just lost 200 feet in the last couple of minutes. So just some little hints of things to do. Questions about that? No. This diagram actually I got. There's some aviation information like this, but from a ski instructor's manual. You never improve if you just stay in your comfort zone. You get hurt if you go into the danger zone. You've got to stretch it a little bit. So Dirty Harry says a man's got to know his limitations. All right. And a famous racing driver, Phil Hill, maybe, but he said in order to become a champion, you have to survive the inevitable crashes. You don't want to do that. You don't want to do that. Just squeeze yourself out of the comfort level a little bit. So, retrieval equipment. It's pessimistic to make sure all the retrieval equipment is ready, but it sure will be pleasant for those times when you do land out that it isn't 7 hours before anybody can come get you because they have to fix the retrieve equipment.
That's my glider. That's my glider, Marley.
I know. I don't know where Karsten found this picture, but it's not your car, but it's definitely your glider. So we thought that would be really cool. So these are the kind of things that can happen. Let me go back. Oops. This mouse is extremely sensitive. All right. Funny story about this one. Your retrieve car. Funny story. A German glider pilot takes off in the contest. His crew gets on the radio and says, "There is the car keys." And his answer after a second is, "Oh, they have in my pocket." And then he says, I will wrap them in a handkerchief and throw them out the side window. Did you see them? Nine. No. It helps to have a checklist to cover all these things. There's just too many. You're going to leave something out if you don't have a checklist. But it's very important to have all this stuff. I put cell phone numbers in bold because you can prepare everything else. But if you land out and can't contact anybody, you're done. So some of us use trackers, satellite trackers, or something. But make sure you have some way of contacting somebody to come get you. And I will say that in a lot of places where we fly around Perry, only Verizon will get a cell phone call. The other cell companies doesn't seem to get cell calls as well. So preparation, road transport, crew, assume you're going to land out. Got all the bases covered. Your nav stuff, know your nav equipment. Don't be halfway down the first leg trying to figure out what it's telling you. And I've had this happen a couple times at the field. Somebody wants to fly a badge flight of some sort of whiskey, and the cues are popping, come up to me and said, Hartley, how do I set up this nav equipment? I don't know, I don't remember. So, and I didn't. So make sure you know how it is. Sectional. A lot of people consider it a sectional old-fashioned, but in a few more slides, I'm going to show why I think it's not old-fashioned. Food, drink, water in and water out. Figure out how to get rid of that water. Some people, as they get more anxious, have more need to get rid of water. So be sure you can do that. And picture ID and some cash. This isn't money right here. Occasionally, you have to pay some people. My silver badge, I had to land out at Silver Springs, Nevada, because they didn't have a camera for the glider. And Silver Springs is a 7,000 foot by 200 foot runway in the middle of nowhere with a trailer park at the end. And I had to call Minden for a tow plane to come get me. And I had to bribe a very suspicious old lady to let me use her phone to call Minden. So money, and don't sit on your wallet. Get your wallet out of your back pocket and put it somewhere in the glider. And some people use a fisherman's vest with all sorts of pockets. If you should happen to bail out, it would be nice to have your money with you. So anyway, onward. Anytime you got questions, don't hesitate to stop me. Okay, places to avoid. And I'll get to this in a minute, but anybody know why large forests during the day are places to avoid? Nope.
They're heating more slowly.
They suck up heat.
Yep. They have much more thermal inertia. The ground is shaded. It doesn't heat. However, I'm told, and I've not experienced it, but I'm told that late in the day, due to their thermal inertia, they might just save your glide by having air that isn't sinking like the rest of the air. So note this, wet areas east of Madison. Madison is a bit of a sink area. And if you look on a sectional, you can see why. All of Georgia drains down to Madison. All right. Few landable fields, large forested areas. One of the things to learn is to judge some distances and your height and say, okay, a large forested area, but I can glide across it like nobody's business and I'll end up on the other side at 3,000 feet. Or maybe not. Airspace restrictions only show up on the map. Map reading, always from the ground to the map and not vice versa. And prepare the map. We'll see this in a minute. So here's one of my old maps. When I was first came up to Atlanta to fly, I laid out these circles around Monroe and these radials, so that if I identified where I was, I knew about what heading to pick up to go back to Monroe. Okay, just very approximate navigation. Here's a wildlife refuge between Monroe, which is up here, and Macon, which is down here. This whole area is very forested, and so might be wise to deviate around it at times. Here's one that catches a lot of people. See this little thing down here, Macon, TRSA, T-R-S-A. What permission do you need to get into the Macon TRSA? Anybody?
None.
Right, very good. Okay, it's an advisory area, not a regulatory thing. And what flies in and out of there that causes the TRSA? Okay.
What was the question again, Harley?
Say what flies in and out of that TRSA that prompts the advisory area?
Is that Warner Robins?
Yeah, Warner Robins. What do they fly at Warner Robins?
B5As.
Yes, exactly. It's not terribly brilliant to get in too close with those guys because they can't really see everything like we can. Okay. All right. Here's Madison here, Green here. All of Georgia drains down to here and goes down that way south, down these rivers, lakes. I've flown down to about here and turned around and come back. It's pretty pleasant flying right through there. One thing that's important, well, two things that you wouldn't think of to pick up from a sectional. This number here, this big 1 and a 4. Anybody care to tell me what that is?
Obstacle clearance.
Pardon?
Obstacle clearance.
Right, for what?
The obstacles around.
Agreed.
500 feet.
Yeah,
500 feet above the highest obstacle in that square.
there's yes, in the square, but it's not 500 above. It's less than that.
In the 500 Hartley, I think it's 500.
If you look at, I'm looking for it now. There's a couple obstacles in this square that are within a couple hundred feet of that 1.5. I think it is supposed to be 500 above the obstacles in that square. For example, in the Cordele task area where we fly, about halfway between Tifton and Albany, there's a couple of over 1,000-foot TV towers with guy wires that you need to be aware of. So in your flight planning, make sure there isn't something really tall in the general vicinity of where you're going. Because sometimes those things are a little hard to see, especially the guy wears. All right,
Yeah, I believe, and that's something I would follow up on, because I don't think that I don't believe you've got a 500-foot clearance. I think it's an altitude that guarantees that you're above every obstacle in that.
well, that's what I was saying, because here's
Okay,
1.6. And this is 1470 at Juliet, these two towers.
yeah,
So
okay, good deal. Yeah, we're on the same page.
It gives you a couple hundred feet maybe. And these, you can pick them up with your eyeball, but this particular tower symbol is for towers that are over 1,000 feet tall. So these, we should at least be aware that they're in the general area where we're going to fly. Okay, and then I don't have a picture of this, but a lot of swampy areas are depicted on the sectional, and you'd kind of like to avoid those when you can. So, practice, good, perfect practice makes perfect. Practice just reinforces previous errors if you don't try to perfect the practice. Thermaling, you can read as well as I can. But the important thing is look up and look outside. G. Dale, in his book, says, lift off, look up, look out, look out. So if you're getting tense, you're getting low, just relax, take your feet off the rudder for a second. Look up, take a few deep breaths, because the more tense you get, the worse you're going to fly. Steep bank, practice constant attitude, nose attitude. Pretend there's a magic marker in the nose and you're drawing a line on the horizon or above or below the horizon. Important to feel the accelerations. You will I gotta do something about this mouse. You will feel the accelerations of the glider before you actually hear the variometer a little bit. If you're paying attention, if you're tense, you won't feel any of that. So go by the sound, and to really practice, if it's a day where you can climb, don't go all the way to cloud base and stay there and say, I stayed up longer than everybody. Climb up, leave the thermal and go find another thermal. I threw these numbers in just for fun. Helmut Reichmann's book says, try to find one by 1,500 feet. Now, for early practice, that may be a little severe, but surely if you stop the climb at 3,000 or 3,500, you should be able to find another one by 2,000 feet. And climb it, center it, climb it, move on. Cruising. One thing I've noticed that lots of people do that costs them a lot is they fail to notice the variometer sinking, or the plane sinking, the variometer indicator sinking. If the variometer is indicating sink, you need to goose the speed up a little bit. But here's the trick. Variometer is going to be pointing down if you're cruising in neutral air. 1.5 to 2 knots down is what you're going to see in cruise in neutral air. But if it's down at 4 and you're doing 65 in the K-21 or 75 in my glider or 80 or whatever, you're going too slow. And slow in sync is expensive. Kills your L over D. Hold the stick gently, feel the accelerations. And there's a misspelling there, but okay. And deviate as needed. So don't be enamored by the absolute straight line. A 15 to 30 degree deviation is not expensive in terms of distance at all. Over 30 degrees, it starts to get expensive, but it can pay off in weekly lift. Questions about that? All right, so where to go? Well, this is the sky you want to see. This is the sky you want to see. And I mean, zoom off into the horizon. So suggestions. And these are all good advice for early cross-country flights. And most of us do this anytime. You want to test the sky before you go taking it on full board. And I think that you should find at least 2 thermals that you can climb to 4,000 AGL before heading out. Because if you about 1 out of every 4 thermals is significantly better than the rest of them. And how many of us, you guys who've been doing this a while, have been fooled by getting off tow, booming up to 6,000 feet like there was nothing to it, and head out and bombing along and bombing along and bombing along. It's like, where is that next climb? Where is it? Where'd it go? And it's just not there. And finally, you have to settle for something puny. It's better to settle for something puny than to land up. There's another one. Now, this does not mean press on into the face of a thunderstorm rather than turn back. Definitely does not mean that. But just because you encounter a patch of sink, if you turn around, you're going to have to go right back through it again. So there are paths of lift. If you look for patterns in the sky, over time you can train yourself to find them. This little picture here obviously looks like a pattern here. There's clouds over here. There's little wispies in here. And so that looks like maybe a cellular pattern where it's like a honeycomb, where around the edges you find lift and in the middle you find sink. It happens.
Harley,
Yes.
I want to go back to your first point on here because it just happened to me this weekend.
Okay.
So Fernando had me heading out toward Taylor, which was upwind. And so I was working upwind and coming back. And one of the times I was doing that, you know, the conditions for like last weekend, they weren't super.
Right.
And my comfort level was, if I was getting below 3,000 feet, I was MSL, I was pretty much coming back. And I hit one of those extended periods of sink after the Erie. And I probably rode through it for about 30 seconds or so and realized, okay, it's not before thermal. I'm stuck. I turned 45 and, was still in it. And I was like, okay, I'm new at this. I'm turning back. And I went back to my happy thermal. What should I have done? So I was between the Erie and Taylor, and I was dropping to 3,000 feet at that point.
Right. Okay. Well, sink occurs in patches. There are sort of rivers of sink, and then there are islands of sink. And if you're going along with the wind, you can be in a river of sink, and if you'll go left or right half a mile, maybe a mile, you may well get out of the river and into a river of lift. So if your path is along the wind, turn 45 right or 45 left, and things should improve fairly quickly.
Give it at least 30 seconds, 45 seconds
Oh,
before.
yeah, absolutely. You know, it's not going to improve instantly unless you're right on the edge of it. But, you know, certainly within a mile or so, it should be either good or showing signs of improvement. And
Okay.
that'll be 45 seconds to a minute. Yeah. Now, in the case of an island of sync, you might be able to see a reason for the island of sync, or you might not. But again, a deviation right or left should net some improvement within a minute or so.
Okay.
And speed up a little bit, maybe add 10, maybe 15 knots at the most.
Yeah, well, that's what I did first was speed up, and then I just found myself going down faster and faster, and I was like, okay,
Right.
like picking out.
You have to have faith in the mathematics. Yes, you will, the variometer will go down and you will go down faster, but you will spend less time in the sync, and net, you will not lose as much altitude. Even
Okay.
though totally counterintuitive. Okay. Yeah, so that's exactly what you should do. Now, if you are over landable territory, fine, no problem. If you are heading out into unlandable territory, maybe that's the source of the sink. Maybe it's right to turn around and say, not today. Sometimes that's the right answer. But more often than not, you can make it work. Okay. Does that answer your question, Steve?
It does. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Any other questions? I will say this about stay upwind of course. Stay upwind of course line. Why? Because if things, your return to your course line is much faster with a tailwind. But if you're getting low and you're going to get shut down, you might want to go downwind of your course line and be able to cover more territory and possibly pick up a thermal that way that you might miss heading into the wind. But that is what's called the speculation. Not a gamble, speculation. Okay. So planning ahead, gotta have plan B. Always know where you want to be in 15 minutes. Well, yeah, usually. This one, the time-lapse photography of the thermaling effect, you're coming around every 25 seconds or so. You can see which clouds are changing, and you know where you want to head for those clouds. And you want to see a cloud that looked pretty promising, and 2 minutes later it's falling apart. You don't want to head for that. So, yeah. And the judging distance to clouds. This is sometimes hard here because cloud shadows aren't always distinct with the dark forests and the light areas and everything. Out west, the cloud shadow is plain as day. On the desert floor. But around here, with more humidity and more clouds, it's hard to judge cloud shadows. But eventually you sort of learn that that cloud that looks impossibly far away is 1.5 miles, and yeah, you can reach it. And ground features, always be aware of the ground features, no matter what, even if you're flying in the sky, ground features will be important. So blue days, we all love blue days. There are those who maybe jokingly said, blue days are great. Because the clouds don't obscure the heating of the ground and you get better ground heating. Well, horse feathers. Streets are lined up just like on a cloud day. And you look for these little haze domes and wisps. And if you can get under one of these little baby wisps, it'll be the best thermal of the day. Ground features, high ground, sand pits, parking lots, large paved areas of asphalt, villages, little bit small towns like Monroe will frequently kick off thermals. We all know that that's one of our house thermals is more or less over downtown Monroe. Birds always. Flying in a team. And what if two gliders are flying together about 600 feet apart? You have a 700-foot glider searching thermals. And one of the two of you is going to hit a thermal if you do encounter one, and then you can work together to climb together. So if you're flying with another glider and you're flying close, you're wasting some of the advantage that a two glider team would have. Does that make sense to everybody? And smaller triangles, well, okay.
What does that mean? Smaller triangles?
I don't know.
Okay.
We put that in there saying, well, you don't bite off the big chew, but if you're gonna fly, you can fly when it's blue, just like you can fly when it's.
Oh, just a smaller task with blue day. Yeah, right.
Okay, in your first half hour, you can decide on a minimum rate of climb. I don't think so, but okay, you decide on the minimum rate of climb. There's a rule of thumb that at let's say 5,000 feet, there's going to be one thermal that could be 4 or 5 knots, and the rest of them will be 3 knots. When I talk about knots, I'm talking about the average from bottom to top. I'm not talking about what the peak of the variometer shows. And on a 5,000-foot day, you'll frequently see the variometer going up to 5 or 6, but that's not what your average climb rate is going to be. So about 1 thermal in 4 is going to be better than average. So if you're getting 5,000 feet, probably your average thermal is going to be around 3 knots. Changing gears is a good concept. If you're high, go fast. As you get lower, go slower. And gears are McCready's. So 1 McCready is first gear, 2 McCready is second gear, 3 McCready is fourth gear, third gear, 4 McCready is fourth gear. And downshift when you need to go, when you're lower, going slower. There's some really good scientific papers on statistical probabilities all about this by the soaring champion named John Cochran, who's an economist. And it's just, you improve your probability of finding a thermal if you cover more ground. And when you're high, cover more ground fast. You can afford to lose some altitude, but you can cover more ground because you've got more altitude to play with. Down lower, you can't afford to lose some altitude, so you've got to go slower. All right. There's a period a lot of times during the day after the initial burst of thermals and before the really peak of the day happens, but the clouds seem to soften up a bit. So if you start noticing the thermals aren't quite as good as they were, slow down. Not a lot, 10 knots. You want to cross a large blue hole. You can cross it if you have to. Smaller blue holes, you can go around them. But if the day is cycling, if the hole is cycling, sometimes hanging out in the thermal for a little while, you start to see little wisps develop in the hole, and then you can creep across. Anyhow. So final glide. And this is one of those mystical things. We all hope that we can reach final glide. We trust our computer. We have to know for sure that our computer will tell us the truth. And if it isn't set up right, it will lie to you and get you in trouble. You've got to make sure it's set right, and you've tested it so that it does tell you what's going to happen. And a ship that advertises that it's 45 to 1 may or may not be 45 to 1. It might be 42 to 1 or 40 to 1. And if you don't fly with the yaw string absolutely straight, it'll be 38 to 1. So I'm not going to go into the mechanics of exactly how to fly the final glide, but there comes a point in each flight when you're high enough that you can make it home without any more thermals. And that's just such a relief. It really is. Say, I have made it. I'm just going to cruise on home. But you still use cloud and deviate under clouds a little bit and pick up more lift, because so further down the line you can hit sync. You can always convert your speed to altitude if you have to. And when you get home, here's your reward. Questions? I know I've covered a lot of territory rather rapidly, but I'm sure there's a couple of questions out there. And if not, I'm going to give it over to Scott and let him take it from there. So I'm going to stop my screen sharing, and
I can say it makes a lot more sense to me this year than it did last year, Hartley. Thank you.
right, okay, it will make more sense as you go on.
Hartley,
Yes,
why don't we take a few minutes break? We've been at it almost an hour.
Yeah.
So suggest we take a quick 5+ minute bathroom break and reconvene. What do you think?
sounds like a good idea. Let's do it.
Okay. We'll see
All right.
everybody back a little before 8 then. How's that sound?
Okay, be back at 5 minutes till 8. It's
Okay,
11 minutes to 8 right now.
sounds good.
All right.
We're on the bathroom break. It's working now. Yeah, I don't know if it's related to that or not, but it said some sort of weekend activity. Yeah, but it seems to be okay now.
Hey, Hartley,
I say
can you hear
you,
me?
Michael.
Yep.
Yeah.
Do you know anybody else that's got a trailer? Because Murray's down at seniors, and I was just wondering.
No, I don't.
Okay. Alrighty,
I know that, the Ace Hardware and Social Circle rents them.
okay, I'll check those guys and see. It might just be worth it to go ahead and take it over.
Yeah, and there, I'm sure, I wonder if places like Home Depot rent them.
Oh, they do. Just depends on which one, if they have them.
Yeah.
Some of them carry more. Okay, cool. I'll hit that maybe in Monroe too. Also, it was interesting. I've got a good photography of me climbing into the back over my seat to get at my oxygen tank.
Uh-huh.
And I've never touched it. It's been disconnected. But after I pulled it out, I was like, I've never cracked the valve,
Uh-huh.
and it had oxygen in it,
Right.
and quite a bit actually. So about a pound. So
One pound, that's all?
yeah,
Because it's supposed to be about 1,800 pounds.
no, I mean 1 pound weight
Oh,
after I emptied it.
oh, I got it.
Because I was the tank was from 2000, the last pressure test was 2009. And I thought since it wasn't hooked up, it didn't have any O2 in it. So
Is it steel or aluminum?
steel.
Okay. So it's out of date.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So but I wanted to pull it out just to see what the weight difference was. And so
And that's all it weighed, was a pound?
the tank itself is close to 20 pounds or more,
Mhm.
but there was only a pound of oxygen. And I was like, I didn't know how much a full tank actually of oxygen weighs.
Oh.
So like with just the oxygen weight.
Oh, I don't know, but my welding tanks are a hell of a lot heavier full than they are empty.
Yeah, exactly. All the gas chromatography stuff I did, it was that way too. So
Yeah. So, yeah. Yeah, so now you need to recalculate the weight and balance on your plane. That's a significant rearward weight.
yeah, and I've got, so that's why I put it back in there just for the weight, purely outside of the 1 pound. I'll see how much difference it makes where it's situated.
Yeah.
But
So do you have a mountain high system or a different ordinary?
it's a different one. Yeah, but that's older than the tank even.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So
Hey, Michael, I missed the first part of this, but isn't your tank pretty close to your CG back there behind your noggin?
no, it's all the way behind. It's all the way behind the wing. The actual valve itself is at the trailing edge of the wing, and then the rest of the tank extends, and it's a good 1.5 long tank, 2-foot tank.
So you have to turn it on before you rig the plane?
No, no, you can actually reach up over the wing roots to get at the valve. It sits a little bit high.
Oh, okay.
But I need that weight in there because of me. If I take that out, I'm going to have to put more water in the tail.
Yeah, so a welding shop can redo the certification.
Okay. Yep. And then I'm going to pull the all the regulator stuff out and just see what condition that's in.
And if you're gonna fly with oxygen, you need a finger pulse ox too.
Yep. I got one of those.
You planning going high over Monroe
Yes, most definitely.
Hey,
or Cordele?
Hopefully Cordeal, the towering Q down there, and maybe the wind on the backside.
Well, maybe the magical wave between Montezuma and Cordele, huh?
Yeah.
it's been done before.
I was gonna say I heard tell of that.
Yeah. Was it 13,000, 15,000, something like that?
Yeah, 13 is what I thought I remembered.
13 and a half?
Yeah.
Partly, but before we turn it over to Scott, I was going to mention, it came to mind a final glide exercise that Fernando had mentioned that I played with a little bit, and it is to go about 5 miles out, and whether you do it by your computer or just estimating, but you know, if it kind of double checks your flight computer, because you go out and say, okay, my computer says I'm going to arrive at Monroe at 2,000 feet. Give yourself a little buffer and head to Monroe. And if you end up pretty damn close to 2,000 feet, that is sort of confirming. And if it's off, you've got a cushion. And if it works, then you can climb back up and go 5 miles out and do it again. And I did that several times, and it made me feel better about my equipment.
Yeah, well, in a decent glider like yours or your Discus, modern glider, the modern flight computer, you will not believe that it will lead you home at the right altitude. You'll look and say, there's no way that's going to happen. Can't do it. And it does. So, yeah, but don't just blindly trust the instruments. Make sure you know that they work. So, okay, Scott, you about ready?
Hartley, before you turn it over, any ideas or suggestions on setting McCready, a technique? You go out and you maybe do 2 thermals and look at the averager, or?
Yeah, so here's, I'll give you Doug Jacobs's take on it. Doug is one of our few existing world champions. For the southeastern soaring, set your McCready on 2 and fly that. What you want to set it on is the bottom to top average -1. In other words, if you're getting bottom to top at 3 knots, set it on 2 and just fly that, because it's such a flat maximum that you will not go far wrong. Okay.
And Pat, if you want to hear some other ideas on airspeed from a hard hitting dumbass, stand by, because I'll talk about that as well. 'Cause I'm going to dumb everything down, and I do that for me.
And at the end of a 3-hour flight that's been a little bit of a struggle, your IQ will be 50% of what it was to start with. And so that's not a bad idea at all.
All right, are we ready to roll?
We are ready.
Can everybody see that? Let's see.
Yep.
All right, let me just move some stuff around here a little bit. All right, can everybody see that and hear me?
Yes.
That is truly a miracle that we've reached
It
this
really is a
stage.
miracle. I'm impressed.
Me too.
Thank you, Mitch. Thank you for that photograph.
Don't jinx him.
Hey, you're listening to a hard-hitting dumbass, let me tell you. So here we go. You know, traditionally, Hartley and I have done this cross-country ground school, and we were at for many years, and we were doing paper slides at his house. Now we're doing Zoom PowerPoint and without a net, and we are just the opening act of more guys to follow, you know, so it's kind of an aviation crawl, walk, run progression that is common to all sorts of training. And we're doing basics tonight, guys. And in the weeks ahead, Hartley will advertise when we're going to talk with Chip and Michael Abel, and they're going to put their spin on it, get a little bit more complex. And then, of course, Fernando will talk up, I believe, a few more weeks down the road on other subjects. So that's the progression of this. So we're going to talk basics tonight. I'm going to keep it real simple because that's how I operate. And that's no reflection on you guys. That's just the way I view it from having done a number of these. The target audience tonight is a silver distance wannabe. And that guy, we have a few in the audience. We got a lot of guys that are well past that. But that guy has obviously finished bronze. If he's going to take club ship cross country, he's a bronze pilot. So he's had two 2-hour flights, duration flights. He knows how to thermal. And he's done a number of precision short field landings. So he's accomplished at that as well. The silver distance pilot may or may not have done his 5-hour flight. He may or may not have done his silver height, silver altitude. But we're talking about the 50K flight, which we'll talk about because that 50K has got an asterisk. So that's who we're talking about tonight. But I think it's a good review for a lot of guys. We haven't done much cross country in months, most of us. So I think what I have to say hopefully will be beneficial to a bigger audience. So without further ado, let's go. And why won't this advance? Are you there with me still?
Yep.
Yep.
I see your cursor.
Yeah. And I cannot advance the slide with the down arrow.
But try clicking the mouse.
Yeah. Next. All right, we'll do it that way. I don't know what the problem is. I tie this in with preparation because there's a little story here. This was my first jet, and 060, I flew that jet quite a bit. SP on the tail is Spangdahlem, Germany. This was late 70s, early 80s. This is a F4E, guys. And honestly, I think this is one of the more sinister designed machines ever designed by man. Nose to tail, I think it's in a class all itself in terms of the sinister looks of this thing. Air-to-air load, 4 AIM-7 Sparrow radar guided missiles, 4 AIM-9s heat seek and sidewinders and a gun. So, from the mid-60s to the mid-70s, this was probably the finest fighter in the world. You see it in a camo paint job. This is the jungle Vietnam era paint job. And while I was there, they took the tan out and made that dark charcoal gray. So it was a very dark green and dark gray paint job, which matched the Luftwaffe and the RAF very closely and very sinister. Look at the leading edge of the wing. You see daylight in there? Those are leading edge slats to help turn with MiGs because they had a much better turn capability. So that was designed in to help us dogfight with MiG-21s, which were our big rivals at the time. So that's a little bit of background for me. I was about 23 years old when I started flying this thing. And this gets into preparation in a quote that I want to start with. And it goes like this. I was a brand new lieutenant. And one of the first mass briefings for a big 70-plus launch, 70-plus jet launch was in the base theater to accommodate that many guys, 2 people per jet, of course. And I'm just a brand new guy hanging on with all these Vietnam era combat vets who were the leaders. And when we walked into the theater, they had a quote that I thought was very impressive, and I've always remembered it. And I think it relates to what we're doing here. And we don't know who's in this audience listening to us tonight that has big plans and big goals ahead of them that could be achieved. We could have future diamond pilots, record holders, contest winners, national champions, and it could all start really this evening with the stuff you're going to hear and then from other guys down the road. So without further ado, this was the quote from a country lawyer well before the Civil War. And I think this is one of the more prescient quotes on preparation I've ever seen. Again, this was something we saw filing into this theater, ready to go practice war. So that's where we are tonight. and we'll move right into our objectives. How's that? So here's our objectives tonight. Develop a framework for organizing cross-country planning. Nuts and bolts stuff that I hope will help you get organized to go, okay? The second bullet, learn how to transition beyond the books using a practical thought process, a way to think about cross-country flying. Everybody hearing me okay?
Yep.
Okay. And I think that beyond the books is important because there's so many good textbooks out there written by very accomplished cross-country pilots. But when you take that book and you get to the last chapter and you close it, I think the natural tendency is to say, well, now what? How do I take this fascinating read and make next Saturday happen for me? You know, so that's hopefully what we're going to do tonight, is get beyond the books to get you really thinking about how to organize this, how to have a framework. Third bullet, learn to use pacing and decision gates to optimize success. Pacing and decision gates. We'll talk some more about that. Appreciate that organization leads to greater situational awareness. I can't emphasize that enough. And the last bullet, realize that an organized game plan, updated frequently, is the key to safety and success. And this is the very same stuff we did in fighters. We went in with a playbook and a game plan, but we updated it as need be. And I think there's a lot of parallels to cross-country soaring to my earlier careers. So that's what we're going to try to do tonight. Here we go. Preparation. Absolutely stack the deck in your favor. Preparation starts weeks or months earlier. Weeks or months earlier, not a week before or the day of. Bronze needs to be complete to take a club ship cross country. The singles, EFX or whiskey. So again, the silver distance pilot has a completed bronze. He knows how to thermal and can do a precision spot landing if need be to put it in the field. Some silver legs are recommended. It'd be nice to have the 5-hour duration out of the way. It's not required. It'd be nice to have the silver height out of the way, but not required. Some guys do them all in Cordial. They bang them all three out in one flight, all 3 legs of the silver badge. So just some food for thought there. Fourth bullet, you want to be intimately familiar with EFX or whiskey flying and rigging. Now, of those 2 birds, again, the title of this particular slide is Stack the Deck. I'm going to take whiskey, okay? I'm not going to take EFX. Is EFX cross-country capable? Absolutely. Is whiskey a better cross-country machine? Absolutely. And I know whiskey is much easier to rig and de-rig than EFX, at least in my humble opinion. So I'm going to fly the retractable. I think that's the way to go. And I would be very familiar with whiskey before I'm going to go do silver distance. Fly it a lot, get comfortable with it. Be familiar with your trailer and your tow vehicle prep. Know the trailer inside and out. Make sure you know the tire situation on it, tire pressures, tire age, tow vehicle prep, ball, hitch, everything else you need for the proper tow vehicle, preferably hooked up, ready to go with keys in it, all part of the prep for going at yourself. And the last bullet there, guys, build your team early, okay? This is not a solo endeavor, really. Crew resource management. You want your official observer on board, your retrieve crew, the guys who volunteer to come get you. Your tow pilot needs to be informed of what you're going to do, and I'll explain in more detail how that is important. And the OD, you know, you've blocked out the glider for the day because it's a silver distance attempt, and you've got everybody on board days and days beforehand. Know the requirement for an official observer, okay? What their minimum badge level needs to be. It's pretty low. So you want to make sure you got an experienced guy to handle that for you. Questions on this slide? Hartley, if there's anything you want to add, feel free, please.
No, this reinforces one of my slides, and it's extremely important.
Yeah.
Once you've got these things squared away, you don't have to worry about what happens? You can concentrate totally on accomplishing the flight.
There you go. All right. Prep continued. Understand your flight recorder. Make sure it's within calibration and understand how to declare a flight in it through post-flight CU analysis. So pre through post-flight, know that thing cold. A lot of guys are now using their own equipment, UDI GC or something like that. Whatever you're using, be familiar with it, guys. Use it a lot, even when you're not going cross country, so that you're comfortable with it. You shouldn't have any massive same day questions on how this thing works. You might get a blank stare back. So be very comfortable with your flight recorder. Second bullet, understand your cockpit nav displays and controls. And notice what I've got in parentheses, active waypoint. Guys, I think this is huge. These things will do a lot. There's a lot of menus and submodes and all this, but make sure you can control the active waypoint with final glide information. Because sometimes I'm toggling between the point ahead of me and the point behind me, where I came from last. And I'll explain a little bit about that down the road, but be able to change your active waypoint selectively in flight. Third bullet, I'm safe. Everybody's heard that acronym from Safety Day or elsewhere. You want to be rested, you want to be fed, hydrated, have a relief plan, and comfortable in the cockpit. That wallet needs to be out of your butt pocket and either in a shirt pocket or in the side map pocket of the glider. But I learned that the hard way on my first record attempt landing in Lake City, Florida. I sat on a fat wallet for hours and hours, and that was bad news. That hurt. So don't keep your wallet in your back pocket.
Some of us have thinner wallets, so we don't have that issue.
Yeah. Understand your decision gates, okay? Again, I'm trying to transition from books to reality. When that alarm goes off that morning and you put your feet on the floor and you go, oh shit, I'm going silver distance today. Well, maybe, but really you're gonna go through a series of decision gates. Do I go to the field? Do I rig? Do I ground tow? Do I take off? Do I start on task? I want to be on time for each of those decision gates, but you may not get past a certain gate. You may get to the field and say, no, the weather's not good enough to rig or ground towing, or probably one of the biggest ones is, okay, I'll take off, but am I going to start the task? So each of those is an independent decision, and pacing is important for those decision gates. When to do all the above. I never, ever, guys, want to rush, okay? I know that if I'm doing 500K Cordeal, I want to get airborne about 11:30, 11:15 to 11:30. And I'm going to back up the day so that I'm rigging early, staying rested, hydrated, ready to grid early, and have priority to launch. Not such an important deal for a silver distance, but pacing is important for all these decision gates. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Weather. There's many, many sources, of course. I think most guys have them racked and stacked on their phones. I do. And, you know, really it starts with something as fundamental as what's the local weather gal saying on the evening news, you know, for next Saturday, and then diving into other sources that get more and more detailed as you get closer to that date. But I compare them. Are they all really basically saying the same thing for the day of interest? And as I get closer, I get a more refined look at it. Windy, I think, is wonderful. Looking at winds, clouds, et cetera, et cetera. Windy is a great app. But there's just a ton of them out there that you can use, but compare and ask others what they think as well. On the day of interest, that desired day, I want Q, okay? I'm not gonna launch on task on a blue day for silver distance. I'm just not gonna do it. But on longer tasks, the conditions can change And I may end up in blue conditions, whether I like it or not. Because particularly for the longer tasks, 300 or 500K, you're running through a lot of airspace and a lot of time. Okay, so you're sampling a pretty big area of weather that could change. But for the shorter tasks, I want Q. And if I don't have a day with Q, I'm not going to go. It's much more difficult for cloud reading and strength of lift on a blue day. Third bullet, I want to watch for high broken or overcast decks moving in. Windy can tell you that when the next front might be coming in. And I want to be very careful about being out on task when those move in from the west. Once we get out of the fronts and we're under the Bermuda high that we typically have for our soaring season, not a big problem, but we've seen it all winter with prefrontal conditions and thickening conditions. So just be cognizant of that. Hartley mentioned minimum cloud base 4,000. I'm a wimp. I want 5,000 and AGL. And those are actually fairly common once we get into April and May. Okay, that's not being too selective in my mind. So around here, 5,000 AGL, 6,000 MSL is a nice day to get out on course. Weather, or the winds rather, generally light once we're into the Bermuda high effect. You know, they're stronger during the frontally active season, but know what they are, even though they might be out of the northwest at 10 or 15 knots maximum, but know what they are. You can get a little bit of alignment with streets, even if it's not the direction you're going to go. You might see them looking up and down the wind line, but be aware of the winds because that can affect your flight as well. Questions on this slide, guys?
I just one comment. You mentioned windy, but learn to read the skew T, the winds, the sounding, because from one glance at the sounding or a glance at 2 or 3 hours worth of sounding, you can really tell what's likely to happen. And you get a picture of the profile of all of the air all the way up and down, which is sometimes different than just what we look at. So it's very useful information. It's worth the effort it takes to learn it.
Good point. Good point. All right. If anybody has questions, guys, feel free to stop me. All right.
Yeah, and one other thing, early in the day, a 4,000 foot cloud base will become a 5,000 foot cloud base later in the day.
Yeah.
So,
Good point.
yeah.
Okay. Thermaling basics. Hey, you know how to thermal already. You've proved that with bronze. Okay. You know how to thermal. Be confident of that. But we're going to change our mindset about thermals. This time of year, after a long winter of scratching at 1,500 feet, we love thermals. I'm just so happy to be back in a gaggle going up at 1 knot or 2 knots. But when we're out on course for a cross country, we need to have a different view of thermals. Use only the strongest lift and be picky. Ignore weaker lift as much as possible, particularly if you're up high. Core quickly within 2 turns and bank steeply in the strongest lift. That's where your strongest rate of climb is going to be. Okay. And I shift the turn circle frequently towards the core. I never go more than about 2 turns without moving my turn circle in one direction or another to try to optimize. I just can't maintain the 360 turn after turn after turn and expect to stay in the core. So the punchline on thermaling basics is the last bullet there. Higher average cross-country ground speeds are most influenced by fast climb rates, not inner thermal speed. In other words, an efficient thermaler who picks only the best lift is going to beat a guy who doesn't, but flies fast. Does that make sense? It's less important if I'm going 70 or 80 or 90. than if I can climb quickly while I'm climbing. I think that's hugely important. So be a good thermaler. And the problem we have when we're flying locally, particularly in the weaker months, is every thermal is our friend. And when you're cross-country flying, not so. In fact, I will probably go out on a limb and say thermaling is a necessary evil for cross-country flying that needs to be minimized as much as possible. And I'll talk about that some more later. It's a necessary evil, and that's not how we normally think of thermals. Thermaling versus cruising. When you are stopping the thermal, you're feeding zeros into your average ground speed. Okay, yeah, there's a little bit of wind drift, but it's insignificant. So it is a necessary evil on longer flights. Don't fall in love with lift out on course. Okay, they are tools to be used. They're gas stations, as Hartley has mentioned. They're gas stations. We don't stop for gas when our fuel tank says 3/4. Okay, so stop when you need it. Climb to cruise ratio. I think this is the key number here, the third bullet. About 30% of your time, typically in southeast conditions, will be climbing. And you want to try to push it, guys, to be cruising 70% of the time, okay? 70% of the time, you should need to be pushing down course because there's miles to cover, particularly for the longer tasks. In parentheses, Uvalde, very strong conditions. Gliders watered up to the max. They're thermaling about 10% of the time and cruising incredible long glides 90% of the time for super high average ground speeds. While thermaling, constantly assess the sky ahead during each circle. Every time I wrap around looking down course, I'm looking for changes in the sky ahead and thinking, where am I going next? Where am I going next? The actual brain cells involved with thermaling are going to be second nature, and I'm really not thinking about it much other than shifting my circle as we described. But I'm focused mostly on reading the sky and where am I going next and when am I leaving that lift, okay? Often the lift weakens as you get closer to cloud base. Time to scoot, time to scoot. Questions on this slide, guys?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
You're probably going to mention it, but basically as you're cruising, G. Dale describes it as shark flight as opposed to dolphin flight. Were you going to hit that, Scott?
I am.
Yeah, good. Okay.
Yeah, I am. Funny. All right, thermaling versus cruising a little bit more. So stay in the top third of the lift band. This is technique, not procedure. I think it's wise, and I'll have a hand-drawn slide here shortly to describe that. But if you have bases that day at 6,000 AGL, then the top third of that would be 4,000 to 6,000. So that's where I want to try to reside as much as possible. You get a little bit of true airspeed advantage the higher you are, and you sometimes can see that, maybe a 10 knot advantage with true airspeed over indicated. You're up where it's cooler, and you're up under the shade of clouds. There's just lots of good reasons to be up in that lift band, top 1/3 of the vertical column from the ground to cloud base. Bullet number 2, try a ratio of work a thermal, skip the next 2 to accomplish this. And you can get into quite a rhythm that works. You take a climb up near cloud base, push out on course, and head towards the next cloud down course, but don't necessarily stop and thermal there. You know, if you're at 5,000 feet AGL and you know the top third goes down to 4, hey, skip it. Maybe skip the next one again to push yourself further down course. But third bullet, if you hit one of those particularly strong thermals that Hartley talked about earlier, whoa, stop and use it. Anytime you hit a real boomer, and they're crazy, you'll go, where did that come from? I haven't seen that in the last hour or whatever. They are particularly strong. Do stop and work it. And then you can get into that rhythm again of work that one, skip the next 2 if possible. Keep pushing down track, guys. It's hugely important, not so much for silver distance, but the longer task, 300 and certainly 500, you've got to be relentless. The clock is your enemy. Whereas when you were flying silver duration locally, doing 5 hours, you swear your watch was broken. The day drags on. So it is just the exact opposite for longer tasks. You can't believe it's already 2:30. You've got so many more miles to go. So it's a different mindset. Keep pushing down track. Be relentless about that. The last bullet was just for my own 500K flight. Very unremarkable average numbers. Average glide distance about 6 miles. Average ground speed right at the average for Georgia 500K flights, 50 miles an hour. And my climb cruise ratio was right about 30/70. Okay, so that's pretty typical for Southeast conditions. Hardly anything to add to that, or anybody else?
No, I'd say that really pretty well sums it up. Just keep pushing. And oh yeah, one other thing. At Cordele, at least, there's an altitude in general. If you get below that, you will have a much harder time picking up and working the thermal. And that's typically around 3,000 AGL.
Okay.
The thermals are just much better organized above 3,000 AGL. And when you hit them, you nail it in the first turn and up you go.
Yeah.
Down lower than that, yeah, you can get the thermal, but it's in and out. No matter what you do, it's in and out, working,
Yeah.
picking up. So again, this is beating the drum for having sampled some thermals before even heading out on course. Because you can fly from 2,000, you get off at the toe of 2,000.
Okay.
But don't let yourself get below the altitude where it's hard to work. And the other point I would say is the concept of bridging thermals, or where you're going to come to that.
No, go ahead.
Okay, the bridging thermal is, let's say that you're working the rhythm of work 1, skip 2, or somewhere around there, and you skip 2, and then you skip 3, and you skip another one, and say, this is not good. Now you've hit your 1.5 knotter where you've been getting 3 and 4 knots. Take it up to get yourself back up to a height where you can work. Don't take it all the way to the top and move on. And
Yeah.
maybe you have to work another weak one. And if you have to work 2 weak ones, then take that one all the way to the top and start over. I mean, mentally start over.
Right.
Yeah, just do what you need to keep yourself up in that altitude band.
Very
Yeah.
good.
And for me, if I'm skipping the 2 that I'm going to skip, I typically would still pull up, slow down, and milk them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Good point, Panos, and I'll show that on my next slide. All right, good stuff. Oh, I'll get to that slide here in a bit. Plan execution. Use checklists beginning with at-home packing, guys. Don't go with the philosophy, I'll just put everything in my flight bag and it's good to go. Now, make sure you got everything. Check it off. Food, snacks, everything you need, piddle packs, whatever you're going to need. Check it off. Make sure it's on that checklist and it's indeed packed in your car. Adhere to pacing guidelines driven by your desired takeoff time. For the 300 and 500Ks, you want to get going early before noon, particularly at Cordele where the lift will start sooner. Not quite so critical for silver distance, but I want to get going as soon as I can on silver distance as well, shortly after noon if it's soarable. Third bullet, when your cross-country go criteria is met, go. And I'm going to talk about this, okay? This is something I think that is fairly simple and intuitive, and we're going to talk about that some more here shortly. Read the sky ahead constantly. Do it on local flights, but particularly every time you turn around and you're pointed down track, be studying that sky ahead when you're going cross country, because that's huge on where you're going to go next. Again, work that top 1/3 of the lift band. More aggressive pilots may work the top half. That's not me. That's not where I want to be. I'm more conservative, more cautious. Shift gears, your speed based on current and future conditions. I'll have a diagram on that as well. But the short version of that is if I'm high and the clouds ahead look good, the sky ahead looks good, I'm going to be smoking. I'm going to be doing 90 knots perhaps. And if I'm lower or the sky ahead doesn't look so good, I'm going to start slowing down. Okay, get back closer to best glide. Follow your cue and energy lines. And this is what Hartley mentioned just briefly or shortly a while ago. G. Dale, famous Brit contest pilot and author. Be a shark, not a dolphin. What do we mean by that? Sharks swim laterally, okay? If you've watched them in the water, whereas a dolphin is more a vertical motion. So yeah, you might pull up a little bit under clouds, even if you're not going to stop in thermal. But en route to the next cloud, be a shark in terms of studying that sky between you and that next good looking cue. Are there little bubbles and wisps that maybe warrant turning left 10 degrees or right 5 degrees and flying through? And that's kind of advanced stuff, because when we're looking down track, what are we focused on? What do we really see? We see that next nice dark bottom cue. Cool, that's where I'm headed. But there is a significant number of miles perhaps between you and that cloud. So be smart about what you do laterally en route to that cloud, because it can make up a few hundred feet here and there in the long run. So be a shark laterally, not so much a dolphin vertically.
I mean, those little wispies may or may not produce what you sense as lift, but almost as good is they will be reduced sink.
Yeah.
So if you can go through a lot of reduced sink, you can increase your L over D by 40% just by reducing the sink.
Excellent. And the last bullet on this slide, guys, stop for only the strongest lift. Of course, that's if you're up high. You know, if you're down lower, then I'm going to be less picky, certainly. So it's just kind of common sense. But if you're up high, life is good. Be real picky about what you stop for. Don't stop for every thermal if you're up at 5,500 feet AGL. That'll just kill your average ground speed. Anything else to add, guys, on this slide? All right. So here's one of the old paper slides from the days, and Hartley and I did this with just that at his place. And it shows vertically a cross section of the ground at the bottom, hash marks, and cloud base at a very nice 6,000 AGL. That's a nice Cordial day. We do get them. We can get them at Monroe for that matter. So again, I want to work the top third of the lift band as much as possible, 4,000 to 6,000 feet. And here's an example of work one, skip two, with the emphasis on working that one that's stronger, okay? Maybe a 5 knot climb versus 2 knots. How might I see that ahead of me? It might be bigger and darker, one of these motherships with some cloud suck, with definitely stronger lift underneath it. And perhaps the next two are definitely punier looking cue that don't have as much vertical to them, hence the bottoms aren't as dark. So again, reading the sky ahead is important, but this is what I'm trying to translate. And as panel said, yeah, do pull up a little bit. When we say be a shark, not a dolphin, I'm still going to pull up a little bit as I go under these clouds, get a few feet out of it, and then push over out of the sink shown by the red arrows and keep on moving. Any questions on this, guys? We are dumbing it down, gents, Scott Anderson style, okay? Dumbing it down. I like it. It works. Gear shifting. Somebody talked earlier about McCready speeds, and I've always tongue-in-cheek said, I said McCready 2, then I ignore it. I'm not a McCready guy, but then again, I don't race this the kind of cross-country flying I've done, so I keep it real simple. So this little matrix is for a standard class glider like Whiskey Whiskey or really anything. The top of this is conditions ahead, and there's 2 categories. The conditions ahead are good or questionable. Okay. Along the left side is your height above the ground, and you could call those high, medium, low in that 0 to 6,000 vertical band. Okay. So let's start with your high, and the conditions ahead look good. How about 90 knots? And I tell you what, you can get into a scene at Cordeal where you do this mile after mile after mile. It is just a scream. It is a hoot. So much fun on a really strong day when you're up high and the sky ahead looks like it's photoshopped. It is just so much fun. If you're up high and the sky ahead looks questionable, maybe there's a big blue gap or the cue don't look as good, then yes, maybe even up high, I'm going to back it off to say 70 or so. If I'm in the middle of my height band and the conditions ahead look good, maybe 70 is where I want to be. And if I'm in the middle of the height band and the conditions ahead look questionable, I'm going, maybe it's time to back this thing off to about best glide, maybe 55 knots or thereabouts, which is pretty close to best glide for most class ships. And now if I'm low, regardless of the conditions, man, I'm slowing this thing down and I want to cover as many miles as I can because miles are samples. I'm sampling air, okay? So that's as simple as I do it. And I think it works great. And I'm a 3-speed bike. That's all I am, or something to that effect. There's nothing magic about 90. I could be doing 85 or 95. I don't care. I'm not holding speed that closely. Same with the other speeds. You know, that's an approximate speed. This isn't an instrument check ride. So that's my version of gear shifting. I think it works well, and it's worked well for me.
One comment, even under these circumstances, you always goose the speed a little bit for sync and back the speed off a little bit if you hit lift. Just, you know, you do not fly a constant speed.
Absolutely.
No matter what.
Absolutely. Good point, Harley. Thanks for adding that. Any other questions, guys, on gear shifting? You can see that, you know, and guys who've flown with me just in the Monroe area, you know, in the aggregate, aviation is complicated. So I just try to break it down into a bunch of simple steps. Speed control, boom, it's right here. Simple, simple, simple. Cloud reading, climb 1, skip 2, simple, simple, simple. These tools in your toolbox work. I guarantee you they work. I think they work well.
I do have a question. I like simple, but I'm also a numbers guy at the same time. So Schempp-Hirth, you know, they typically don't publish the polars. Do you have any feel for what sort of L over D penalty we're seeing between that 70 and 90 jump? Just rough number so I can visualize it.
No, but if you've got something like an UDI, you can get your actual L over D as one of your little nav box options. And I can tell you that in my Ventus, when I'm cruising at say 90 between clouds, I'm cruising fast and I'm probably also in sync because I'm between clouds. I see some pretty miserable L over D, Steve. 28-to-1 comes to mind a lot.
Okay.
When I'm cruising in the blue between Q at high speed, I'm going, oh man, I spent a lot of money for 28-to-1. And that's just the way it is, you know. But then again, you can be under this big mothership and hauling butt, and you're looking at infinite L over D because you're doing so well with rising air, you know. So you see the whole gamut. You see the whole gamut. But yes, it is sobering if you have that option, like on an UDI, to put actual L over D in one of the nav boxes and to see what you're actually achieving.
Okay.
This is my Discus D manual, and the back page is a polar from Schempp-Hirth.
Okay.
The also Paul Remdy's site publishes the polars that have actually been observed over lots and lots and lots of gliders.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So go poking around in Paul Remdy's site if you want numbers. But what Scott says is true to a large extent. The polars of all these gliders are pretty much the same. And they changes the delta between one speed and another within certain ranges is quite small. So yes, if you're trying to get the last bit of speed out of it, absolutely. But if you just want to cruise pretty close to what's right, these numbers work.
And I will add, Steve, and for everybody, that I generally don't want to go much faster than 90. Even in a 15-meter flat glider, there's just a hell of an altitude penalty for smoking along at 100 plus in Georgia. You know, maybe you can get away with it in Texas or out west, but 90 is to me fast enough. And if I can keep pushing down track and get those kinds of interthermal speeds, I'm in pretty good shape.
Yeah, 90 is really fast to me right now.
Yeah.
But I will say this, that with water, you can go maybe 10 knots faster.
Yeah.
But you have to be really good at catching the thermal, because if you're just a fair thermaler, you'll blow through the thermal before you even realize it, and you'll never find it again.
Good points.
So these speeds are good speeds to use until you know something better for yourself.
Okay, thank you.
All right, moving on. So we're going to get into this subject now, because this is one of the key points of this briefing, is what I call the modular cross country. A long route is just a series of short connected segments. Some people would call it airport to airport, and there's significant safety protections, so much reduced stress, okay? This works for all experience levels, and your modern nav displays can certainly assist with the symbology. So let me talk about a little bit of this. I know that I don't want to get into the survey that was put out by Pat, which was excellent, but there's some concern about off-field landings. And what I would like to do here is allay some of that concern with this modular approach. And you can do this in the Southeast. We have airports every 15 to 20 miles, paved or grass. Out west, it's a different story, but notice out west how many more guys have engines in their gliders, okay? So we're going to talk about this and break this apart in more detail, the modular cross country. So here, guys, is the Cordial task area or part of it. And it's a modular example. Every one of these black dots is an airport. Here you see Cordial. Up and down I-75 from top to bottom, you've got Perry, Everidge, Cordial, Ashburn, Tifton, and Adel. And out to the southwest, you've got Sylvester, Oak Ridge, Spence, and Moultrie. Every one of these is a module, okay? And I'll explain the importance of this in just a second. But it's just a number of connected short cross countries, if you will. If you think of it in those terms, and I'll expand on that next. But while we're looking at this slide, typically Cordial to Tifton is your silver distance route. Cordial down to Adel up to Perry and back to Cordial is a good 300K gold distance diamond goal. And then a popular 500K flight down there is Cordial, Adel, Perry, Moultrie, Cordial, using the 3 turn point rule. So let's look at this module in more detail. Let's look at a route segment. Distances vary, but about 15 to 20 miles. If you recall from my 500K, average glide was about 6 miles. So I was doing about 2 climbs and glides per module, okay, roughly, 2 to 3 climbs and glides per module to get from one airport to the other. Glide computers tell you when you can make the next airfield with your built-in safety margin. That safety margin most guys use is 1,000 feet AGL. And the 30-to-1 rule is a manual backup that provides context. So let's look again a little differently at a route segment. Voila, one of the old paper slides. So we have 2 airports here with the X's, one at the bottom and then up at the top. And the 30-to-1 rule basically says you're gonna lose 1,000 feet in 5 miles, okay? So we're gonna back this off from this destination airport, which is at the top, which shows a field elevation of 1,000 feet MSL. So obviously we're up in the Monroe area. We know that Monroe is 875, call it 900. And for the non-Georgia Tech grads, let's call it 1,000 feet above sea level, that destination airport. So your safety height is, I want to be over the top of that airport at 2,000 MSL or 1,000 AGL. Is everybody with me on that so far? Field elevation's 1,000 feet, pattern at 2,000 MSL, 1,000 AGL. So if I back that off 5 miles, I want to be at 3,000 MSL. Back it off 10, 4,000 MSL, 15 miles, which is typical route segment. That's about how far is the Winder, 5,000 MSL. And then I've got in red there, I think a real key to this whole presentation is what I call a decision area. If I am looking down track at the next airport in this one module, let's say this is Monroe to Winder. And if I'm above 5,000 feet, if I'm 5,500 feet at that decision area, good grief, I can glide to that next airport and never have to land in a cow pasture en route, typically, okay, typically, unless you hit some horrendous sink, which isn't that likely. So the decision area, we're going to talk about a lot more here in a minute, but that's how we tie this in. Each module, guys, each airport to airport subset of this longer task has a decision area for the next airport. And with modern nav gear, whether it's an UDI or whatever you're using, it's very easy to see, hey, I've got that made, okay? If I'm in this decision area, sometimes I'll up track, but I'll keep an toggle the waypoint behind me. So, okay, I can still make the airport behind me. Can I tiptoe further down track? Okay, now I can make this airport here and switch waypoints. That's why it's very important to be able to toggle waypoints back and forth. Any questions on this concept, guys? Because it's really key to everything more that we're going to say here. The decision area between the airports, can I make it to that next airport? Yes, go. Or no, not yet, I need to climb or tiptoe further down track until I can say yes.
I guess the key thing would be that this is more for the higher performance singles using one, right?
You're breaking up badly. Say it again.
Sorry, this 30-to-1 would be more applicable to the higher performance singles, right? Not the K21.
Oh yeah, you know, this is your standard class glider, whiskey or better.
Okay.
Easily, I think you can do 30-to-1. And while I'm on the subject, some of the cross-country techs use 50% of your L over D. I'm a cautious conservative guy, but I think 50% is too conservative.
Okay.
You know, if I've got a 40-to-1 glider, I'm not using 20-to-1 as my planning tool. That's not in Georgia, at least.
What would you use in the K21 on two-person flight?
Go ahead.
I've used in the K21, I've used 30-to-1 rule comfortably.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've typically used about 26-to-1.
Yeah.
But then I have nav gear and polars that I've used enough to know that I can trust them.
Yeah.
This rule of thumb is just my backup in case I get the feeling that my nav gear isn't working right.
Yeah, Steve, let me add here, because you bring out a good question that I can elaborate on. These are minimum numbers, guys, 3,000 MSL at 5 miles, 4,000 at 10, et cetera. But be advised that on a good day, you're probably going to be well in excess of those values at 15 miles, at 10 miles, okay? You're going to be well above that by 1,000 feet, perhaps 1,500 feet. So you've got a big fudge factor built into it that way. That makes sense?
Yes.
Okay. All right, route planning. Read this SSA Silver Badge FAQs. They are excellent and they can prevent a lot of heartache after the fact. So understand the frequently asked questions in the badge section of the website, and it will walk you through a lot of the gotchas of the silver badge, the silver distance in particular. So now what you need, guys, is you need a 50-kilometer straight leg that starts at either the takeoff and the tow release. And we're going to talk about what does that mean, okay? The third bullet and the fourth bullet will clarify this and explain it. So coordinate the release for the side opposite the airfield from the desired task direction. So whoever your tow pilot is, when you check in and get a radio check, if you're going to Winder and in Jackson County, you want to tell him, take me south of the airport, release me south of the airport. Make sure and once they get airborne, if they're not doing that, steer them that way. 23 Lima, come right to south. I need to release on the opposite side of the airport. That way, you're only concerned, look at the last bullet there, you're only concerned with 50 kilometers distance from your takeoff point, okay? And that is the most restrictive point for where you put your turn point. And we'll get into that in a second. Any questions, guys, on this? I'm going to give you a diagram here that hopefully will make it a little clearer. Yep, we'll do that in a second. Next slide. Understand the 1% rule. 50 kilometers only one way is impractical due to low maximum altitude release. In other words, typically on flat ground, you can only go to 1,600 feet AGL because of the 1% rule. The 1% rule is covered well on the website, and Silver Badge Made Easy, Bob Wander's book, covers it quite well. I highly recommend that book. But unless you're Mitch, I don't want to get off at 600 feet AGL and try to get out on the course, okay? So what am I saying? I'm not flying 50K. I'm going to do an outer return with a 50-kilometer leg. 50 kilometers out, fly through a pre-designated turn point, and 50 kilometers back, 100 kilometers total. And if you do that, then now you're allowed a 3,000 foot AGL max release, which, you know, will most guys go to 3? Maybe not, but I'd like to be able to go to 2, 2,500, 2,800, whatever, or 3. And I can do that if I do the 100-kilometer out and back. Okay, that's why I don't shortchange this task to call it 50K. You know, we call 300K and 500K, but I don't call this task 50K. I call it silver distance because it's really going to be 100K. The 1% rule is very onerous, guys. Not good. All right, to best assure flying the required 50K, use a turn point that provides a nav screen symbology, okay? And that has to be pre-declared, that turn point. So you fly through that turn point sector pi, then home. And here's a diagram that hopefully brings all this together. So what we have here is the start of the takeoff, as shown there at the bottom. The hash box is the release area. I want to absolutely make sure that that tow pilot takes me to the opposite side of the airfield to my course direction. If I'm going north, I want to release on the south side so that that 50-kilometer segment starts at the most restricted point, which is the start of the takeoff, and I don't have to worry about the release. 50 kilometers out, and then you see the pi sector, which can be as shown on an UDI or other nav display, and I want to fly through that turn point sector, that pi, okay, and zoom in as you get closer, and make sure you don't just nick it. Make sure you fly through it by a mile or so, and turn around and come home. Does that make sense, guys, for route planning?
Yep.
And in that 50K, 50K flight plan, you may have several modules, and we'll get into that in a sec. Hartley, do you have something to add?
I just want to add, there is a little trap for those using UDIs for this symbology. In UDIs, you use a start or finish line, okay? And when you select a line, it'll ask you for a radius. The line is 1 kilometer long. If you put in 1 kilometer, you will get a line that's 2 kilometers long, and if you don't hit it in the middle part, you will have missed your finish. So people have been trapped by that. So
Let's clarify something here, though. My understanding of silver distance is there's no start gate or finish gate. You release in the hash box there and you just go. You go up to your turn point. You do have to fly through that turn point sector and then you come back, but there is no finish gate, correct? For silver distance.
I don't recall.
I think you just need to fly the 50K back. Just fly over the top of the airport. Now you can circle on down and land.
If you flew 50K, if you flew 50K to the turn point, as long as your release brings you over the 1% rule, you'd be okay landing in a field short of the airport, wouldn't you?
Exactly.
That's true. That's true. But I want to plan to get home.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I'm just saying.
But that's technically true, but I don't have the brain cells to figure that out in flight.
Would you typically plan, is it possible based on Cordial, would you typically plan to fly upwind to the turn point if you can?
No, I'm not going to worry about it. And I'll show you Monroe notional silver distance and Cordial silver distance in a second. But to me, during cross-country season, the winds are fairly light, and I'm not going to play that game. I'm not going to play the upwind, downwind game. I'm just going to go. I'm keeping it simple, Steve.
Yeah.
Simple.
For 50K silver distance, it's really not a critical thing at all.
Yeah.
And
Thanks, thank you.
And I think, as I recall, you're probably right about the finish and all.
Yeah. But, just make sure you fly the 50K out using the criteria here at the bottom. Definitely release on the side opposite. That's a foot stomper here, okay? That takes the release totally out of the equation. Now you've just planned a distance and a turn point that's 50 kilometers from Monroe's runway. Boom.
Yep.
Okay. All right, let's move on here. So let's look at a notional Monroe task area. Silver distance from Monroe to just past Jackson County, and you see the little red pie up there. The apex of that pie is your turn point. So if you look just at the distance, guys, between Monroe and JCA, Jackson County, it's only 28 statute miles. Well, we know we need 32 one way, right? 50 kilometers. So that's why we have the turn point past Jackson County. It's just a GPS turn point. There's nothing on the ground that tells us we're there. It's just something that would be displayed on our nav screen past Jackson County Airport. So option A is the one-way flight, 50 kilometers, 32 statute miles from Monroe up to that red pie. 1% rule, onerous as it is, my max release altitude is 1,700 feet. I don't like that one bit. Option B is the 100 kilometer / 64 statute mile out and return. Now I've got much more latitude on release altitude, 3,000 feet. I'm going to do the out and back. I'm going to do the out and return 100K. Okay. So what are the pros of doing this at Monroe versus Cordial? You have many more opportunities on the calendar. You know, we're down at Cordial for what, about 2 weeks out of the entire year generally. And the soaring season up in Monroe can start as early as late March. We're just a couple of weeks away from soarable weather and have set state records. My son has set junior state records in early March in the FX. So you have more opportunities on the calendar. The other advantage to Monroe is the module distance between airports is shorter than Cordial. In other words, the distance between Monroe and Winder and Jackson County are shorter. So you don't need as much altitude to make it to the next airport. What are the cons of Monroe? The fields are poor. The off-field landing opportunities are poor. These aren't tilled farm fields. They're not generally flat or level. They're cow pastures. I don't want to land in them. I'm not going to get into a big discussion on that, but I do think with the modular approach, you don't have to worry about it. You're going to be above those minimum 31 altitudes. You're going to have an airport within gliding distance. So this is the Monroe option. And I would just tell guys that are looking at silver distances here, don't wait till Core-Deal. If you see a good opportunity and you're ready, you're comfortable with whiskey or whatever, do this. Do the Monroe to the turn point just north of Jackson County and back. Plan for that. You'll have many more opportunities. And we're still several months away from the Core-Deal opportunity.
Yeah.
Questions on this slide, guys?
I will add, you will have to create a GPS turn point in your database.
Yes.
There isn't one that exists for you. You'll have to make your own.
And that's all part of getting comfortable with your nav gear.
Right.
Being able to declare this task in your flight recorder, whether you fly it or not. You might just fly a local flight. You might get to the decision area just north of Monroe and say, this isn't the day, but you've gone through all the pre-flight planning. So yes, good point. So now let's look next at the Core-Deal option. So this is the Core-Deal silver distance option as I see it. The modules are Core-Deal to Ashburn to Tifton, okay? Option A is 42 statute miles one way. So with the 1% rule, you've got a little bit more latitude now. You can release at 2,100 feet. As we mentioned before, this situation, I'm going to coordinate with the tow pilot to have me release north of Core-Deal because I'm going to be heading south on course. So side opposite of your course is your release, okay? Option B is an 84 statute mile out and return. You're going to go Core-Deal to Tifton and come back, okay? And you're going to fly through a turn point down there, little pie sector, carefully so you don't nick it and then come home. And now, because you're flying 84 miles, you can go all the way up to 3,000 feet. You have all kinds of latitude there. So what are the pros, the advantages of Core-Deal over Monroe? Earlier and stronger lift. Those are two separate things. You have earlier lift at Core-Deal, much earlier than often at Monroe. It's a different kind of soil. It's a sandier soil as opposed to clay soil. And the Q will start popping sooner and you can get out on course sooner. Particularly important for the longer tasks where time is your enemy. You're racing the clock. And the lift is stronger. It's amazingly strong at 1 and 2 o'clock, whereas Monroe is much weaker. And often Monroe will be great at 4 o'clock, whereas Core-Deal, that happened hours sooner. So that's the lift is definitely on a good Core-Deal day is phenomenal, and you will feel it. You will feel it in your butt as you're climbing down there. You go, my goodness, this is on steroids. Another advantage of Core-Deal is better fields. Now this is all flat as a pancake. It looks like Kansas. These are tilled farm fields with furrows that can land in that direction. Much better off-field landing options. The Core-Deal cons, you have fewer opportunities. We're just like, again, only down there for 2 weeks generally. So you have much more soaring season up here than you do down there. And the other somewhat of a con is the module distance between airports they're a little bit further apart down there, closer to 20 miles as opposed to say 15 or so. So not a big deal, but they are a little bigger module distances down there. Questions on this slide, guys? All right, we're finishing up, not much more. I know it's going over an hour. So this is a busy slide, but I say let's fly. And so let's break this down into what we're looking at here. This is, again, the silver distance out of Monroe up to that turn point just north of Jackson County, JCA. So you see D73 down there with the little symbol for the airfield. Then you have Winder, and then you see Jackson County. Note what I've done, guys. From the sectional or some other source, I have highlighted with a yellow highlighter what the CTAF frequency is. Because if I do have to land there, I don't want to be fishing for it. I want it accessible on a sectional chart that I can grab in a hurry. If you have ways to do that electronically on your the screen, go for it. That's great. But have that data. And the no RPs is no right-hand patterns. There's no right-hand patterns for Winder or Jackson County, or at least when I did this slide. So that's nice to know. If there is an RP, I want to be a good neighbor when I drop in, and I want to fly appropriate pattern. If it's a right-hand pattern, I want to do that for the locals, okay? So that's the 3 airports. You can see the turn point pi up there. The wind is out of the west-northwest. That's pretty typical for soaring season. You may or may not see clouds lined up in cloud streets, but if you're not going in that direction, maybe it's not so obvious. The little blue squiggles are Q. Obviously, they're probably not to scale, but you can see now what I basically am doing laterally is I'm going Q to Q, and vertically, I'm picking a good climb and then skipping the next 2. And between good Q, I'm doing that shark mode where I'm going to move left and right a little bit to work any energy lines or any puffs or wispies that I think might be working or cost me a little less altitude than going straight. So that's that. And you see again the decision area, okay, in red. So we've coordinated with their tow pilot. We're releasing on the side opposite of our course. So boom, that got done. We can tow as high as 3,000 feet, so we're not worried about that because we're going to do an out and back. So up to 3,000 feet. And now I'm south of the airfield. I'm just working lift to get the feel for the day. Cloud mapping a little bit, what part of the queue seems to have the strongest lift. That'll generally stay consistent through the day. Often it's the southwest portion of it because that's more in sunlight. So whatever seems to be working. And then I will at some point push north into that decision area from my release area south of Monroe. So now I'm parked north of Monroe, got good lift. I can easily glide back to Monroe, just looking at back over my shoulder, and I'm going, doggone it, I can make Winder, you know, I'm confident I can make it. And just like in your personal lives, we got a lot of professional people in this club. This is where preparation meets opportunity. You have worked your tail off to get to this decision area. You've practiced it. You've worked the nav gear, the flight declaration, everything. And now you can easily make Winder, and the sky ahead looks good. Guys, this is when you go. This is when you go cross country. Boom, right there, the decision area. You've met your criteria. You get up there, you get over the top of Winder, you go north of Winder, you get into the next decision area. You can easily see Winder back over your shoulder. You go, okay, go. Now you get up into the turn point area, and notice I put the turn point in the blue because that's how it always works. And now you're in a little bit of a dilemma, okay? Well, I want to go out to that turn point. I have to, and I don't want to piss away too much altitude. Well, you've got Jackson County as your active waypoint. You can see that I can make it. I could tiptoe out there, or I can wait. I see that queue that's just a little bit upwind left of that red pie. Hey, maybe that thing will drift towards my turn point, and I'll just play that to working. Okay. As Hartley mentioned on the way up, I'm going to bias my route upwind a little bit. I want to be very careful, guys, about not chasing Q downwind away from my course line. Be very careful about that. Just as you would around Monroe, I don't want to be chasing Q downwind away from Monroe if I can help it. So you go through the turn point carefully. And I kind of consider this almost like a little bit of an instrument maneuver. I'm looking at this on my nav display and going, okay, I'm going to fly through this almost like I'm flying, an instrument approach or something. Get through that little red pie and then turn around, and the sky will look different. And I'm going to get just south of Jackson County, and I'm going to be in the decision area for Winder. I got this, and then cross over Winder. Decision area for Monroe, I've got this. And that's a cool feeling. Regardless of the course length, when you have final glide for your destination, that is just the coolest feeling in the world. And yeah, so that is a little practice flight there at the end. Any questions, guys, on this fairly busy slide and how I see it? You can see this is in a nutshell, dumbed down. Amazingly, I think, just in one slide. We've put it all here. It is dumbed down, and everything you really need to know is right here to fly cross country comfortably in your glass ship.
Well done, Scott. Well done.
All right. So
That sums it up very nicely. All the-
yeah, I'm just a hard-hitting dumbass, guys. So there you go. This is a summary. This briefing is designed to provide a framework, a way to start organizing lots of random information. All that stuff floating around in your head. Keep things as simple as possible. That's my flying lifestyle. Starts with knowledge, your ship, know it inside and out, know your nav gear inside and out, A to Z, pre-flight through post-flight, and know the rules. The rules can be a real pain, okay? So that gets back to the silver distance, frequently asked questions, silver badge. Bob Winder's Silver Badge Made Easy is a great book to have. I highly recommend that. And the fourth bullet, look at local flights as trial runs, up to including decision areas. You can go through all this to include coordinating with your tow pilot to release you south of the field. You can run up to your first decision area just north of Monroe, and you can look at it and think, okay, I could do Winder, I could make Winder. Okay, so you can run through all these things so that when the big day comes and you get up to that decision area, I've done all this before. I'm comfortable with having gone this far. And now I'm just gliding up to an airfield that I'll soon be able to see with my own eyeballs, not just the GPS. So that gets my last bullet there. Finally, when the big day comes, go with confidence using this framework. Go with confidence, because it really does work. And I think it makes life so much easier.
There's something neither one of us have emphasized, although we've hit on it. Now to say this, on your practice flights, download your log, look at it with CU. If you don't have CU, get CU for your laptop, and look and see if that log would qualify. If you made the distance, if that log would actually get you your distance, because you don't want to find out on the big day and accomplish the flight and find that in fact your logger didn't do what it was supposed to do.
Yeah.
I had
That's my
that
point.
experience on my first 300K flight, and I never had it again.
Okay, here's my final quote, guys. I think this sums it up. We take it one day at a time, one briefing at a time. But this guy figured it out, what, 400 or 500 years ago. And that's all I got.
All right. Thank you, Scott. That's great.
Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, Scott. Good job.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much.
All right. So anything anybody wants to contribute or bring up or question or whatever?
Well, a little bit of like what's next, me and Chip sort of thing idea here is also with your logs, don't be afraid to ask somebody that's flown cross country quite a bit to take a look at it. I'd always be glad to take a look at your logs and see what I see. It doesn't take that long. It's good work for me because when I'm racing, I'm looking at what other people are doing. And when Chip and I go to talk about this, I'll be talking about proving grounds and GTA, and as will Chip, and he'll be adding some of his stuff in there too. So.
And then let me add this. Before you go, you've decided it's the big day. Make sure you have somebody who has experience with this stuff. Check over your plan and your setup. Because you can think that you have it right and maybe you don't. And so the rest of us are happy to help with that.
All right.
All right? Looks like
Enjoy it, guys.
I'm going to stop the recording because I think we have finished. If I can find the, oh, there it is. Okay.